Hello again, and thank you for those of you who've returned, and welcome to those of you who have just arrived. Earlier in the afternoon, we together spoke about then, which is really a long time ago, I'm discovering. Then, when we all first arrived here independently. And now, in this hour and a half, we thought it would be interesting to talk about now. I have an image that's been within me for a long time, and I am so moved that in this festival that Andrea has so magnificently curated, this image finally is embodied. And the image is that I'm doing what I've done for 50 years, which feels like this. It's like looking at your ankle and her shoulder and those tears and this twist and that contraction. For 50 years, sort of like not wanting to miss a single second at all levels that I was learning about experiencing. And in many ways, I felt very solo, even though I somehow ended up, I think I was self-appointing to be the one to keep track of the evolution of the discipline of authentic movement. And in that task, I think I felt often solo, trying to just keep track with every student that was arising into the studio space or descending into the studio space. In this image, I am walking out of this kind of holding, and I'm walking out like this into a clearing. And it's a clear space. I think it's the kind of clear space that Annie and Gordy have done so much to create in Northampton, as we talked earlier. And here's this clear space, and I look around, and there you are, my colleague from all these years, and I imagine you were doing the same thing, focused. And I look around, and there you are, doing the same, I guess, that concentration. And I see you, Andrea, in the clearing. And we're just kind of wandering into this shared space. And that's what I feel sitting here with the four of you. Oh my goodness, I am part of this wholeness. As I think about that, then I think about what else have we arrived here with that's so similar? Because as you keep reminding us, Andrea, our work is very, very different, each of us, and yet, of course, there's strong, strong root systems that I think are very similar in the discipline, dance, mysticism, and healing, I would imagine, very similar in the work of each of you. And I was thinking, what would be a good place to start? There's so many polarities that we're working with all the time in studio space, and we began to talk a little bit about it earlier this afternoon, about the dancer, the audience, the dancer, the other dancer, the healer, the one who's being healed, the mover, the witness. There's so many places of relationships, yes, and so many places of tension. And I think when we fully commit to that kind of embodied tension, the potential for transformation is enormous. So I wondered about will and surrender, which is so central in my own learning always, from moment to moment within any individual, among a group of individuals. And I wondered if you have any ideas about how those two forces work in sort of in an alchemical way in your studio spaces, in the arc even of the development of your disciplines.
Two forces being will and surrender.
Mm-hmm. I mean, both is so dynamic, so dynamic. Yeah. Well, I can say in the discipline as a mover, if I close my eyes and I notice that I'm starting to move my arm this way, there's always a moment somewhere along that path where I say, do I choose to continue this gesture or not? Is it too large for me? Is it evoking more than I'm ready or able to contain or express? So there's will right there in relationship to this fact that my arm is being moved and my chin is dropping and this shoulder. So it's just so much a part, maybe of being a human being. Maybe all of us wandering around are constantly saying, do I want to pick up the bananas now and then get the shoes at the store? Or, I mean, it's exciting to me. It's very dynamic. How do we know? And again, I think for me, I've learned so much from the inner witness about how to know when to fully surrender and when to create a boundary.
Could you say more about that? You learned so much about that conversation between will and surrender. Could you just say a little bit more about that? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Please?
Well, now I want to tell you what my teacher, John Weir, said. He said, we're not allowed to ask a question unless we say the statement behind it. Can just say something about why you're asking that. So I just don't go off into whatnot.
I like that.
I imagine it hugely in your work, but I don't know.
Yes, and so I guess I wanted to hear more from you about also what's behind that articulation, and in a kind of experiential way as well as a language and theoretical way. Like, what is happening there for you in your work and in yourself before I jump off into whatever my interpretation is in how I'm working, and which would be infinite too, but just to get a little bit more of a feel for that conversation for you, because I don't use those two words a lot. I think about tone of the body and mind. There's just a different referencing. So I just wanted to hear more of your world in that before I go into mine. Yeah.
Okay. Probably for me, this is so important because my life's, maybe we all have some central task that we're just chewing on our whole lives in terms of our longing for some kind of liberation in the deepest sense of our personal realities. And I think of separation as my work, my personal life's work. I have had to learn about separation. It's so easy for me to fall in love, and so hard to learn that this is a separate person, flower, tree, building. I'm a good merger. Yeah. And so in this inquiry about what's the difference between merging and unitive consciousness, again, as I mentioned earlier, that dialogue in between where the inner witness is active, thank goodness, really helps. I mean, I think it's the inner witness that's saying, I'm not going to extend my wrist one more second, because if I do, I'll start to cry, I'll flood the room with tears, I'll never be able to get out of here, we'll all drown, and so on, so on, so on, so on. So it's that, it's the voice of the inner witness, I think, and which is another reason it's been so exciting to learn about how that voice develops and what's required, and how much loving presence is needed to support the development of a loving witness. So I think a lot of it has to do, so that word separation again comes, oh yes, in that moment I'm separating, I'm saying no, I cannot choose to continue to descend into this moment. Or, yes, even though I might be experiencing tremendous fear, ambivalence, all kinds of things, sometimes I am slipped in, as all movers are, to a moment about which they've been ambivalent, and suddenly we enter the fullness and we are in the descent of whatever is arising. But that dialogue right there, to me, again, for safety reasons, is essential. I do not want to just find myself opening into the vastness without my inner witness, the permission, conscious permission of my inner witness.
What occurs to me as a follow-up question is is about, it seems like there are more than two things in terms of will and surrender, because you talked about your inner witness being a kind of guide that's going to tell you whether to go or not. Is that the only voice in that decision?
Oh, I'm sure not. I'm organizing this in the way that makes it most easy to articulate.
Because it seems like it's very complex, actually.
Yes.
The different voices that might say don't, and the different voices that say come on, and how to navigate through those. It's very peaceful feeling to me to think there are only two. It's like, oh, the inner witness says, go. Okay, I'm going to go. Or the inner witness says, stop right there. I'm stopping. I love that.
Yeah. Of course, the dynamics and the detail, what makes it so complex is the content. So I totally understand what you're saying. It's not, it's what is it? The complexity of what is it that is arising in relationship to who's deciding. Yeah.
And I would say, in terms of our different and similar works, that in terms of what we're going for, might obviously determine where we go and when we go where. Like when I see Bonnie entering the space of a baby that you're touching, I mean, I've learned something about entering that clearing space that doesn't seem to have any intention other than goodwill or something. Goodwill. Oh, will. Interesting. Okay. Chew on that for a minute.
Yeah, it's so complex. I think it's the tension that's exciting to me because it's so potentially transformative.
It's so what?
Potentially transformative.
The term embodied tension is great.
The term what?
Embodied tension that
Yes.
you said.
Andrea, do you find this in dancing in a way that...
I was thinking of the times in creative work when you will yourself to begin a process, and the times when you surrender either intentionally or unintentionally. And I think we all have our gateways to that. I mean, in my 30s, I had to get angry or hit my head by mistake and start crying, and then maybe I could get into surrender because I was so willfully engaged. But I also knew that in my own creative process, it would be from the emotional or feeling or hurt landscape. And of course, that has somatic implications, what sensations are arising that one would name hurt.
Yes.
that underneath that is the sense of yielding into the unknown place. But I think any artist that's working finds their own way in, and also you need some will, or you don't get a festival off the ground. And what drives will? Is it ego? Certainly not at this age. I think that one's gone. I mean, it's still there operating, but not in the way that it drives you in your 20s or 30s to feel who you are. It's, there's a sense of this flow that you're part of that's taking you somewhere. In terms of the festival, I promised myself when it started gaining, when you all said, oh yes, I'd like to come, which really wasn't my question. My question was, who else could you send? Meaning, it's just a bigger, different scale gathering when it's of us together. But there was also a sense that at any moment I would say no if it became hard. So is the time right? Is the energy right? I mean, to get these three people's schedule on the same weekend open and change the date once for Janet is kind of a miraculous phenomenon, and that I was teaching at Smith this fall, and so they allow us in these spaces, which are not that readily available from the community perspective. So there were a lot of openings that Will started, but it's meeting with is the what you're after also a surrendering into, oh, I guess we do it. Yes, I'll step up and take the role. I had a good friend, John Elder. I was given the John Elder Chair in Environmental Studies at Middlebury, and he was my hero as a teacher forever, and I never, ever expected to try to stand in his shoes as the first endowed chair in his name. But so one thing I try to say when I'm teaching is, you never know when it's your turn. It maybe has nothing to do with will. It arrives, and then you have practiced your whole life to try to meet it. So I guess that's back to relationship. Yeah.
You never know when it's your turn.
You never know.
That's another question. I love that.
Is it
But I
my
don't
turn?
know.
If you wanted to say something about surrender and will, or your turn.
I was enjoying myself.
That's allowed too.
Well, yielding is a major principle. By the way, Nancy thought I should tell for anyone. Is there anyone here who wasn't here before? What? You weren't here 2 hours ago?
Those are the people who were not.
Oh,
Several.
then you were right. She said I should say why I'm wearing my hat. It's the light. I've had cataract surgery, which is an incredible miracle, but I can't take the bright light or I wouldn't see anybody. So it's not just fashion. Oh my, raise your hands again. That's why we have people here. I thought nobody's going to come back after that, so. Yielding. And that's been a very big question for me. That's not yielding, that's collapse. So, what do? I sit up straight. But I'm tired. Nope, sit up straight, shoulder back. So there's will there. Is there anything else? So I spent years looking for Is there anything else? So if you put your hands on your knees, everybody's sitting, it's easy enough. You could still do it this way. And just maybe go like this. And then put your hands there. Now collapse. Now sit up straight already. Come on. And just let your hands rest. Is your spine free? It's good enough. Yielding. Are you collapsed? Are you holding yourself up? Or are you just yielding? So I don't know if that has anything at all to do with will and collapsing, but yielding, just I'll do one more thing. Some of you did this already, but who knows? I don't know. Take your socks off. You know, just listening to people's boring. Take your socks off. Come on. Rub your hands. Rub your feet, the bottom, a few times. Did anybody come back? Were you here earlier? Raise your hand. Okay. And now stand. Just do one foot. Stand. Let your weight shift. Don't shift your weight. Just, you notice a difference? Some of you will, maybe, and some of you won't. Is that will that you notice the difference? No. Then go down to your other foot. Sorry, I'm starting to do something else. My will went over there. No, okay. Just stand. You can shift your weight. And just sit down. Your turn.
I actually have two questions for Bonnie, since I think part of our fun is being able to ask each other questions too. So there's two things that come to mind. One, Bonnie, I remember a story, and we make these stories up, I think, but I remember one where, didn't you for a year massage your feet before you got out of bed?
I've done that for over 50 years.
Oh. And maybe, yeah, it does something, it seems. Yes. So I tried it. It's worth trying. The other was, maybe, could you say just something about it in relation to 3 years of recuperating after collapse?
When I collapsed?
Yeah, I mean, that's a will to not just stay in that state.
You have some experience too with that. We all do. Because I was so collapsed, I had to give up everything. And the thing that was the hardest to give up, to yield to, was longing. And I yielded. And the one thing that I didn't have to worry about was love. It never diminished. I didn't collapse love. But I had to yield and let go of longing. I'm here. You stood up. On the other hand, when I was 10, I broke this arm and my hand was like that as a child. And the official word was a claw hand. I don't think they could get away with that today. But I could extend my fingers if my wrist bent. If you go like this, your fingers will extend and flex just by nature of the length of tendons, muscles. Then you have to call in something else to do that. And look, today, so if I wanted, even when my daughter, who might still be here, you are wonderful. When you were born, I asked a Zen teacher, what's better? Should I put my hands this way with my palms together, or should I have my fingers together? And he said, I think your palms. I said, okay. But today I can do both. I'm 2 years away from 80 and I keep getting longer fingers. That's will. The will to yield. It's quite amazing. In fact, a month ago, I couldn't open as much as I am now. So growing old is an illusion that we create society and as individuals. Of course I'm getting old. That's why I have the hat on really now. Of course we're getting older. But to get old is a metaphor. It's an illusion.
Actually, that's a question we began to talk about, aging, in terms of where are we now, this many years later. And what...
I'm not hearing you very well. I'm right next to you.
Aging. Remember, we had begun to talk a bit about that and thinking about what this might be like. I don't know. Do you want to say anything, Nancy?
I'm still chewing on what's happened so far and the implications of will and surrender and support and collapse and intention and circumstance and modulation of tone and relationship. Because in contact improvisation, you got two people's will and surrender. And it can't just be one. So what is that environment teaching us? And this image that I've had of this third mind, which comes from a William Burroughs book that he did with a French artist, I think, although I haven't found that book. It was a collaboration. And I think he said that when any two minds are at work together, there's a third mind at work. And so this image of a collaboration being this harmonic third thing really appealed to me, and it related to what I experienced meeting another person and negotiating that kind of this way, softening, strengthening, on a physical level and on every other level. But I found that by emphasizing this third mind, it seemed to go too far and make people passive in waiting for sort of divine intervention, you could say, in where to go.
You mean it was a timing issue? One person was ready and the other one wasn't?
No, it was more like if we think about these two paths sort of implying a third, and we're going there, that if you were, let's say, touching someone and waiting to feel an impulse together to move, that you, whether it's physically not enough tone, or mentally not enough tone. And I feel like emotional tone is also something that I'm very interested in, and how the issue of tone goes through all those different levels. But what I mean is that if you think, okay, God's going to take care of it, so I can just like collapse, it doesn't seem to work that way. Or if you're too high tone, then maybe you can't feel it. So how do I modulate my tone in myself and in relation to this other person so that this third mind can arrive? So that kind of passivity, or no, I'm going to tell us what to do, and okay, I'll just go along, because if we're following, but can we both follow? And if we're both following, then maybe there's a third mind at work. But what is the preparation for that, both physically and intentionally? If I don't want that, or what I want is what I know I want, and I want you to do the other part of what I know I like, so there's a lot of will there, but there's also a lot of history, and nothing wrong with liking what you like. But if it's a collaboration, do you like to have a collaboration where one person is calling all the shots? Maybe. Sometimes. So anyway, I feel it on a physical level and on an intentional and emotional and spiritual. Talk about this other force. What is this other force? What do we think it is? Is it God? Is it, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not asking that rhetorically, really. But it's intriguing. And then the micro aspects of that intention or will. And then when you think, I'm pushing against this thing, it's not moving. Like, maybe that's okay. Don't back off right away. But how long? Until you think, well, maybe this isn't the right time. Instead of you try once and there's a limit, you say, oh, never mind. Like, how long? So all of those micro individual decisions, and who knows what they're based on, patterns of all kinds. But what I learn and love about what I've been doing and what I've felt from all of you is that it is a constant negotiation. And we're learning how it works. Because there are all these other people we're in relationship to, and we grow, and our conditions. Conditions is another word that's been kind of very strong for me lately, how conditions affect things. Where we are, whether we have the chocolate and the flowers, or where, so many things will affect what happens. If you have a group of people and one person isn't there, that's going to shift the potentialities and the actualities, and just to study that, just to be interested in that. But I think that this boiled down to will and surrender is intriguing to me. I can feel my resistance to it a little bit, but that also means that there's something interesting there.
And then you name a third force, which to me is what it's all about. What happens from that tension? Some third thing that doesn't belong to either one or either part of oneself or either one in an external relationship. I love your question. What is that? What is that third, invisible, unrehearsed, unimaginable, usually, it seems, the arrival,
And what is it pointed towards? We talked about art versus healing versus, not versus, but like all the different ways that we point this. We might be drawing from that unimaginable place.
Yes.
But what is it in the service of?
Oh, that's fantastic. What if we're drawing from it, but we don't, we think we're longing for it. But what if we're already, oh, yeah. I like to think of it that way.
You don't think of it that way? Already? That it's there. We're not making it, is my sense. That each in our own ways, we are opening to the clearing, or we're all the different language that we use for the unimaginable, unspeakable source that we direct however we want to, towards other people, towards making art, towards mystical experience, towards making a festival where people can come together.
Nature,
Nature,
being in nature.
nature.
Sometimes I think we work so much with the emptiness, the potency of emptiness before and after every round of moving and witnessing. And sometimes I think that the gestures are waiting for us to embody them and for us to witness them, that they're waiting. That's what I think of in response to your question about is this third place already, are we already in relationship to it, unknowing? What if everything's preparing to appear and we think it's up to us for it to appear? Wouldn't that be a wonderful way to live? Speaking of yielding, let's just yield into that. Yeah. We tend to feel so responsible to make things happen as best we can, as beautiful as we can, with as much integrity as we can. What if it's awaiting us and it's only our attention, awareness? Yeah.
Related to this, if I might, there's another image that I've been working with relative to contact improvisation that came up in a conversation of a frame and an empty middle. Because I was talking about how we worked with Steve in early days, and that he gave us a few practices to do, standing, doing the small dance, some rolling and disorientation, throwing ourselves at each other. And that was about it. And then many hours of improvising. So I felt like those practices gave us a frame, but he left space for us to work the materials and to have the thing arise. And that empty space in the middle was essential, and that it's hard to describe. And so how do you teach that? So we talked about this with the forms arising. So you teach what you can, and maybe the forms, the frame can get very thick with things to do, and the space in the middle gets small. But without a frame, it's like, you know? And then I thought as an extra thing, when I thought about Steve, was not only did we have these practices in this space, but it was infused in a certain way with some kind of maybe nonverbal intentionality. We were in an art gallery, so that gave it a context too. But something about different things that he would say would kind of intend it, but not make it. And so each person had their own agency to make in that empty space, but it was framed and it was infused and it was informed, but it wasn't formed. So this beautiful image that I mentioned from Mary Fulkerson about taking the glove without the hand, did I mention that to you, or we were talking about it earlier? It's an article that she wrote in CQ called Taking the Glove Without the Hand. So what is the glove without the life form that formed it? So if you get a form without the life in it, what's missing? And what do you get, and what can you do with it? So it's just been an interesting question of how to, that extra infusion, the bit of framing, the bit of intention, and the space. Sometimes that's has to be willful on my part to inhibit the generation of stuff, to leave the space open, which is the whole Gordy and Annie's APE space thing, to leave it empty. To keep clearing, fill it up, empty it out. Don't keep it empty all the time, like fill it up, empty it out, fill it up.
So Andrea, in terms of dance and theater, does the stage automatically, is that you're given in terms of what Nancy's saying? The frame, is that how it all starts? I know in painting, Phil's taught me so much about the frame There's just a frame there, and then he comes toward the canvas, the empty canvas. But the frame, it's just what you're saying. There's some structure. I imagine it's the stage, is it?
I think in my body, I probably remember every space I've danced in. I don't know whether you do. Each space seems to be its own frame, in a way. And of course, dancing outside is a whole nother dimension and in relation to cosmological space. But there's something, I'm not a main stage performer, really. I really like intimate spaces. So I think there's something about scale and frame, both as a painter and as a dancer, that does shape what emerges. I'm thinking of Authentic Movement in the Creamery, where Jan let me inhabit and live in her amazing studio in Sebastopol, California, for 3 or 4 months. And that frame evoked very specific, luxurious safety, no other requirements except see what arises and be totally surprised, but be safe, and then occasionally you'd show up and go away. Or a lover would show up and go away. But, basically the space was there, and the emptiness and what would emerge. So I don't have a sense of a one frame, except in my experience, because my experiences with dance have been so positive in my life. It's the safest place for me, the stage. I feel like I can do things on stage before I can live them in life. I get to rehearse them a little bit, whether it's voice or opening the heart more or relaxing your weight or yielding. There's something about the witnessing on a stage that for me has always felt safe rather than threatening. I try to remember that now because age does come into play, I must say. There are a few things that I would have some things to say about age and agency, but still, it's a safe place. Piano is a little less, but dancing feels like, home ground.
Well, should we follow this question about aging and
Yeah.
move more into it?
You said you had a few things.
I have a few things.
Yeah.
Well, I find myself saying, because I have so many wonderful former students at various ages, including current students that are helping with the festival. So I keep both hearing myself say, well, the old lady, meaning me, and also appreciating why people are so concerned about me, which I think has to do with age. Like, are you tired? Or we're doing it with each other also. But it's real. There is certain things that feel specific to this age. My dear friend Harriet Brickman once said at a birthday, do you recognize yourself at this age? And that was a good question. Selfies kind of are helpful. Really? Instead of being kind of, like, oh no, never take a picture of yourself, I take a lot of pictures of myself just to try to feel in the context of where I am, what's emerging. Although what Bonnie worked with this morning about the glow of the inner light throughout the entire skin, and that can give a whole different sense to aging, I must say. So a lot of it's language and imagery, but the body's a little different. I don't have anything profound to say about it, but I do find myself calling myself the old lady and kind of liking it. They give you a seat on the metro, for one thing. And instead of being upset about that, sure, thanks. Anyway, you probably have more interesting things than I have to say about that, but it feels like a real phase in how you live in it. It's, again, you never know when it's your turn, and then there you are. My mother used to look at her hand, and she'd say, whose hand is this? And I thought, but now...
From one old lady to another.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm an old lady. I claim that I'm an old lady, and I am an old lady. Yet, it's one of the best times of my life. I'm still generating. I'm just generating as an old lady instead of as a young lady. I guess for me, it's living until I'm dead, rather than dying until I'm dead. And being so ill for so many years, I was housebound 3 years, and then it took about 10 years, and I'm still not well, but I'm great. It's yielding to where I am. And being an old lady has advantages. I don't have to worry about what I'm going to be when I grow up. I can take the day and be grateful for it. And I still have aspirations if I live long enough. Will I fulfill them? Maybe. But that doesn't mean I don't have them. So it's a paradox. It's a paradox. And it's one to look forward to. You know, the alternative is that you won't have the chance to experience it. It's part of living. And there is this fantasy about it. That's what I was talking about, not the living of it.
I understand very much what you're talking about. And I probably would use a different words when you say yielding into the aging process. I feel, maybe this is from my what I have learned in so many different ways, including so much privilege in hospice work, but also in that time of such tremendous interior change. I feel as though I am always experiencing a death of myself as I have known myself to be. Always in the sense of, in those moments of translation, transition, transformation, where I have come over a threshold or into a threshold. So there's so much dying in my life, so much dying. And each time from such descents, there is a way of knowing life that I could have never imagined, so much more. And I too love this time. Sometimes I'm not great with physical pain, but other than that, I feel, maybe because so much of my life had something to do with, this word kenosis, this Greek word, it means self-emptying. And I've begun to understand, that's what my life has been about. This imperative need to be empty, to empty, to empty. And then, as you say, as soon as we empty, then the next invitation fills us, and then this process. There's so many ways to talk about the emptying, but it feels as though at this time there's so much more emptiness and clear space. And there's a fulfillment in that that I never could have imagined. Yeah. I like these changes. Yeah. I like them. And am in awe of them also, like your mother. Like, well, yeah, where are we now? Who is, what is this form? Yeah. And identity keeps softening, as you mentioned, and there's more space for exactly what you say, coming into a new day. What is this now? Yeah. Yeah.
What occurs to me just now is how this is a way of practicing what we preach.
Yes.
You know, you're with a child with some kind of brain injury or something, and it's like, this is perfect, and what? Instead of, no, I don't want to see it, or no, I can't accept that. To do that with ourselves as our conditions change. It's like, no, but it used to be, but this is how it is now. How do I had this, I'm going to, I guess, say it publicly, this phrase that came to mind the other day, wellness in the hellness. Did I mention that yesterday? And I thought, I can't say that. That's negative. You know? What do you mean hellness? Why would I say hellness? But, you know, finding, sometimes it's a needle in a haystack kind of, and sometimes it's huge. But how do we, maybe this is just my practice too, or my way of saying it, is how to find that place of wellness and life and generative or curiosity or whatever is so life-giving to that we experience when the conditions are fraught in other ways that we could be bouncing off and reacting to, and yes, needing to solve some things, attend to some things, but within that changing condition to find it still. And I think we've had a lot of practice, so we're kind of like homing pigeons in a way, but it's not easy. Sometimes it's really easy, and this brings up the thing about one of the questions that you had come up with that was maybe about place or environment of the work. And I feel like some of the environments that we create are sort of incubators. Like they are safe spaces. They are places where this work can really, people can relax and feel it. We can still be discerning, but they don't have to fight a lot of conditions. But I feel like it's really important also for me, because I love going on these, doing retreat workshops and being in beautiful places in the countryside and all these, working all day and being around people and eating good food and being able to take walks in the studio, etc. But what if it's not like that? Can I manage to find that place? When the thing is honking and this is and that hurts and that, you know.
You mean
and
an inner place?
Yeah, it's basically an inner place that then, I don't know about in and out really, but manifests. Maybe that's a different question, but
Let's talk about that question.
the in and out.
The in and out.
But I feel like I could feel my resistance to the question, and I was studying that as you guys were embracing it and talking, and I thought, and I just really, I guess the way I experience it is as condition, changing condition in terms of body, in terms of whether it's about money or where you live or how your family is or just so many different things. And within all of that, I guess my practice is how to find the place that we've been cultivating these years in our work. It might take a different form because of aging or other changing conditions. But I just feel like the resonance of that is what feeds me and what seems to feed other people that I'm around. So that's the work. And I have forms that I've worked with, and I love them, and I still like to use them, but maybe there are new forms. We're asking this with the magazine as we go through a change, which we'll talk more about tomorrow, but change evolution or sudden change or intentional things or things that happen that you then have to synchronize with? Unexpected change? Yeah, so all of that's part of the question of aging for me. Yeah.
I would just want to say and then ask, the one place I don't feel much change that has anything to do with age is in authentic movement. It doesn't feel as though that inner outer realm is different now than it has been. I mean, it's different, but it's not different. You know? Do you feel?
What do you mean? I don't know
I
what
mean,
you mean.
like certainly different movements arise and different experiences arise, and there's a different emerging dialogue with what wants to come through, but the process of it feels very similar at this age than it did when I met you in 1979, and have worked with the same authentic movement group for 40 years. So I've had a very consistent place to watch, to notice how that feels. So my question is how you feel about that in your experience. Does it feel quite different now than it did, Jan, at
My own moving?
your sense of where you go and what the sensory somatic experience is in that place, which feels timeless rather than time-oriented?
Yes, yes.
Does that feel different to you now?
But I understand very much what you're saying. In one sense, it is the same. The inner space, the unseen nature of it feels the same in my arcing through this process in my adult life. I think what changes is witness consciousness. And that how we come into relationship, how my inner witness comes into relationship to what is arising as a mover, which for the last maybe, this is a little scary to say in this company, but I go into the studio and I wait, and there is no movement for maybe the last 6 years. So the stillness just keeps developing, or it's very engaging. And so it's my inner witness in relationship to that phenomena of moving into stillness or back and forth, however it goes in any of us, that my relationship to it keeps changing as my inner witness, or as I'm witnessing other movers, or witnessing other movers, witnessing other witnesses, witnessing other movers, or witnessing other witnesses, witnessing each other. So what's happening is a very, 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 what's the word? Multifaceted, multidimensional experience in the development of witness consciousness that is sourced in mover consciousness. It starts with the mover, and then the study in becoming a moving witness, and then the study becoming a silent witness, and then a speaking witness, and then empty witness eventually. So that's where so much of my own learning has come since I left California, or even since leaving here. Once the inner witness was so established, as I said, has been about the phenomena, this arcing of how the inner witness becomes empty. I guess I needed to follow that question throughout my life. So that's what feels different. But I totally understand in the moving process how it can feel the same. I'm very interested in you saying that. Thank you, for naming your experience of that.
I think it's one of the things that leads to our question or discussion about mentoring in a
Yes.
way. Because how do you transmit or what or why? In my not very eloquent description of the people who've come to help with the festival from all these different 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s age groups of my former students that are all here because they knew I needed help. That's pretty great that people come from London and New Mexico and wherever you're all coming from. But to be able to receive that, I mean, how do you receive it and how do you meet it? And is there anything to offer? And it's not about being particularly mentally sharp.
No.
Mentoring you?
Yeah. So there's got to be a little something else.
Yeah, I guess receiving is a very generous act and something that is hard for some of us to learn about when somehow maybe all of us, regardless of what choices we're making all day long, we like to feel that we can do this. This is an ancient, indescribable gesture. And what is receive? What is the gesture for? It's just a little, I don't know, but it's maybe not as automatic. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe we've been taught to do more of this and know less about. I think of the witness actually in that pot. It's not, the witness isn't holding space. It's something like this. And maybe that's a good way to describe receiving. But I know what you mean. It's quite an invitation. Do you find that in your mentoring?
I just say yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I think one of the issues for me has been about absorption of that, because I remember for many early years in performing, when there would be applause, it would bounce. Or if someone said, "Oh, that was so wonderful, thank you so much," I would say, "Oh, but it was so great working with you." So it would just it would go back so fast, and I thought, I'm not absorbing this. And in a way, it wasn't generous of me to not receive what was being given, and that was hard for me to sort of accept it, and then I could follow up, but really receive it. And I think there's an act of that. Yeah, I'm still learning about that.
Me too.
I'm so interested to get to other topics.
Okay. How are we doing?
What topic does Nancy want to
No, I don't know, but
Okay.
but there were so many juicy things.
Yeah. Oh, so language and writing, because I heard you say you really are wanting to write. It's all I want to do now, and I imagine. Well, I know you're writing. I don't know as much about you.
Yeah.
Are you?
Well, I want to preface that with a complete non sequitur. It's not unrelated, though, I guess. I don't know if a non sequitur has to be completely unrelated, but. Maybe. No, but I wanted to just bring into the room part of what preceded our conversation and some of these emails that we've had and you've been reading them and somehow responding to Andrea in phone and then it coming back. But I had talked about longing. I feel like I'm fairly balanced most of the time between wanting something and being able to kind of let go of it or modify it into something that's mutually da-da-da. But I had this image of the nonverbal space. Mm-hmm. And I just really wanted to have even 5 minutes where Bonnie and Janet and we're not going to do it, don't worry.
She's not going to let go of it, though.
No, I'm letting go. I'm just transforming it into another way of sharing it. But also it was, in terms of language, was very interesting because and the will and surrender thing. Because I had this image of us just being in a space, not talking, because so much of what we do is nonverbal. Communication and sensing things and communicating through space and feeling how space and touch and body and that whole conversation. Could we just do that for 5 minutes? But, so I proposed it.
Several times.
Dog with a bone. No, but, I was practicing. I was practicing, letting go and not letting go at the same time. And so I thought, I'm not going to let go so fast. Just like, okay, you know what, fine. I won't even mention it again. So I thought, well, let me think about this in a different way. And in fact, this does segue to language because it reminds me of something, and I will get back, but I was doing a feedback session with someone in dancing, and I was watching her dance, and I said to her, it feels like you're worried about something. She said, no, I'm not worried. But I said, okay, you're not worried. So I go back to this sort of empty space of observing her, and I had the same feeling that I had had before. So I thought, okay, she's not worried. Concerned. Are you? She said, yes, I'm very concerned. So it was like a total from a no worried, yes opening to concerned, and then we went into something. So that was very interesting. So I learned something about, yes, I can relax about the outer manifestation, and it doesn't have to be worried. I don't care about it being worried, but I'll go back, and I'm feeling the same thing again. What do I do with this thing that I'm feeling to share it? So I looked for another way, and there was a connection, and then there we go. Thus, and back to the story of the nonverbal space, was so, and it was great practice for me, and I put it out, and then Janet, in such a loving and accepting and appreciative way, thought about that, and I appreciate this and that, but I can't see myself doing this for some very good reasons. So I accepted that, and I went back to my feeling, and I kept feeling this desire to do that. And
But
so
I wasn't the only one.
What do you mean? Bonnie didn't say anything because she wasn't even getting the emails.
I wondered about that.
I know, I was kind of waiting to, but
I was in there also. But somehow that doesn't register.
no, you were mediating. You weren't because it wasn't.
Up to a certain point.
And then
then.
the will
Yeah.
came down. Okay, I see it like this. But what I loved was that in between awkward, weird space where there was a potential, but not that. And then I said, well, maybe you could witness us, Maybe that would feel like the right way to be in this thing. It's like, I really appreciate that. But no. And I said, okay, fine. I know I said nonverbal, but maybe you want to read something. I said, oh, thank you so much for proposing. So anyway, I don't know where that leads us, except here we are behind this table with this microphone.
Talking.
But I do feel like there's a lot of that other stuff in the air for sure. And I
What
thought,
is that other stuff?
well, the nonverbal
Okay.
stuff. And I realized the condition also of being on a stage with a kind of audience
Yeah.
feature to the environment. I mean, we can feel like we're together, which we do, and I feel that when we're talking. But the moment we might shift into that, and that is so not your medium, in a way, to be moving. So it helped me understand a little bit more about your work, your way of communicating, and the language that we were using and communicating with one another was so wonderful. It was so respectful. It was so informed. and so open-minded, but at the same time clear about what felt possible for us to do. It was,
But it is my medium. I mean, moving is that's it. And, I mean, and the spectrum to stillness, but that's all the same. The paradox, it's the same. I think it's the witness. It's the phenomenon of the witness that I didn't know how that would belong. But anyway,
Yeah.
we did all that.
Yeah.
We talked about it.
Well,
And we're not moving, just so you can not
But
worry
tomorrow,
about that.
with Lisa Nelson, which is
no,
what
we're
I
not
suggested.
I know,
Oh, they
but
won't do that
no,
either.
no.
No.
But I want to say
Yeah.
something, because what you're talking
important.
about is our conversation, the language. Here we are, we're all completely devoted to embodied consciousness. And I think we share the sense that language, verbal language, is really the bridge between the body and consciousness. I mean, we need it. And I've spent so much time trying to understand, why do we need it? When people come back from moving, why do they need to speak their experience? Why do the witnesses need to hear, to listen? Why do the witnesses need to speak their experience? Not as expert people about movement, but what happens to them in the presence of this person opening or closing? So the language, it seems like, it makes sense to me that we need it for two reasons. It is very simplistic, but one is to connect, because entering fully within one's own body can be very, very solo. Ultimately it has to, even in relationship. I think that we come back from these journeys, and it's a way to remember, for me, that, oh, I belong here in this realm. Oh, here you are. Oh, thank you. So I think it has so much to do with relationship again. And then the other thing that I've learned, I don't know if this makes sense to all of you, is by actually trying to speak what I know to be true and not know how to do it, because language is a symbolic phenomena. Movement experience is not. We can make it into metaphor, but it's not. Direct experience is not symbolic. So there's this huge problem there. But perhaps the development of a consciousness depends on that articulation of what we come to know as true. So those are the two reasons in my wandering around that make the most sense to me, why we have to do this, why we have to keep talking. What is this for you? What is this for you? What happened just now? It's because we're not here. Look how many millions and zillions of us there are now on the planet. We're not here by ourselves. Even though so much isolation and despair is manifest, as though we are here by ourselves. So that's why I think language, I remember years ago in doing retreats in the discipline, I remember coming back and speaking, and one woman just throwing up her legs, rolling backwards, and she said, if anybody says one more word, I'm leaving. It's like, I came here to move, I did not come here to talk. And of course, and yet somehow this discipline, as it has evolved because of each person's participation, there has been this need to speak, to find the word, and to almost always feel it's inadequate. But to be seen and heard in that longing, I love your word, matters. It can be enough.
This is not exactly in line, but I feel that our cells speak language that our cells understand English. And what's interesting, even when I've traveled to other countries where someone may not understand English, their cells understand English, even though their brain doesn't. Just as ours would understand a language that we don't speak. It's a very strange phenomena. But I find that it's not a fact, but we can say something and the cells change with that language, and the person doesn't have a clue in their head what just happened, but might feel a change or might not feel a change in the cells, but we feel a change if our hands are there or there's a movement. So sometimes we call it the mind of the room, that with words, the mind of the room starts to change a particular something. I'm not very clear, so the mind of the room didn't change. But you're listening. It did change for that.
Bonnie? No, I was just thinking about the film yesterday with you and Chris, and how you were being with him, and how you were talking to him. And I was really touched by that, and you were conversing with him through your touching and through your voice and through so many things. And of course he didn't understand what you were saying, but I thought of that when you were talking about how the cells...
But he did understand. Keep going, sorry.
No,
I
no,
interrupted
no,
you.
I'm happy to, please.
continue.
No, I don't have anything more to say.
It would have been different if I didn't speak.
How so?
It would have been different.
Oh,
I
yeah,
don't know, I spoke.
it's true.
You know, you'll say to yourself, maybe I say, you say, someone else says, I always do this, or you always do that. No, you never did it in the future yet. We know it.
Mary?
I can't do that. How do you know? You didn't try it, you know. It hasn't happened yet. But our cells will say, oh, she says I can't do that, so I can't do that ever. You always do that? Oh, that means I always have to do that. So if you're going to say you're always loving and kind and wonderful and all this, that's okay. Then. In the past, it's been difficult for me to do this, but you know, I don't know what I can do in the future. I don't know what I could do now. Shall we try it? Okay. I feel this way, and I'm here forever. I'm lost. Were you lost when you were this age, this age? Yeah, I've always been lost. Are you going to always be lost in the future? Yeah. No hope. Do you want to do that? Yep. I'm comfortable here. Okay. Think about it. No, I don't have to think about it. I like to be depressed. I'm comfortable. I know how to do it. It's easy. No effort. Okay.
So what is required to make the shift?
Desire. Or something happens that propels us or engages us. Those people who were in the movement class this morning, was anybody there?
Probably.
Okay. How many weren't there? Anybody not there? Okay. What I wanted to share is the egg. It's a short edition. How your egg was in your mother when she was an embryo inside your grandmother. So your grandmother was the conduit between you and the world. So it's important to know about your grandmother, if you can. This is your history. When your mother was inside your grandmother. You were inside your grandmother also, your maternal grandmother. And this egg is like, for years.
This is Bonnie's impersonation of an egg.
Breathing in, breathing out. In this convent with other eggs.
Did she say convent?
Yeah,
Meanwhile, your sperm, your half and half, was in another universe. And as an embryo, and I don't know all the details, but there's a primordial base for the sperm, but the sperms are produced throughout a man's life, and they live about 48 hours. So this egg, year after year after year after year, and this sperm is propelled out of the universe into another universe. Drawn to destiny. Knowing exactly where it's going, but doesn't know what it is.
Doesn't know
Only
what
that
it is?
what it is.
It's drawn, along with the million other brothers, because it's a very toxic, dangerous, and passage. So we could look at that as a war, who's the survival of the fittest, or we could look at that it's necessary for the brothers to go together so that one, but they don't know which one, will arrive at something that they're drawn to, but don't know what it is, only that it is. And finally, on that passage, they see something shining and bright and light, and it's the corona radiata around the egg, which is very large, and it's called the golden crown. And somebody shared today in the class workshop that when scientists have looked at shells and eggs in a dish, that when the sperm enters the corona radiata, does this. And that the egg that has the most this is the strongest egg, has the most life force. So when the sperm get there, they're all, pounding on the wall there of this radiating crown, and the egg chooses one. One. And when that enters, there's a radiating of light, and then nothing happens. They yield into each other and die. And out of that death, which you were speaking of, we are conceived. but it isn't known what it is until it happens. And then it's over, and there's the transformation.
It isn't known what it is until it happens.
Yeah, that's a good one.
In a way, the sperm that stops to say, well, I'm not sure, tries to impregnate the uterine wall, isn't going to get there. That's not the one that we are.
It's almost time.
Oh, yeah.
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
So that had something to do with language.
And go ahead.
Don't you know yourself differently now through language? Even though you already knew and experienced this without language? You understand the words because it happened already. It wasn't a lecture.
Ooh, can I just stick in something here? This thing about whether something is prescriptive or descriptive, whether
It's what?
whether it's prescriptive or descriptive, and language's ability, I feel, to go both ways, to come from the body or from experience, and then hopefully, at least that's my wish or hope, is that it can engender something that maybe didn't know itself before that. So that if you're speaking from that place, and I feel like you were the egg and the sperm and you were it, so it wasn't just words, but it was a lot more than that, that something could be awakened through that language rather than another way of delivering it. But if it's on a page, now that's a different kind of thing, too. Can it carry? And what helps it carry from experience to the bridge, to language, to experience? And that's a whole other activity, too.
You were going to say something, too.
Please, jump.
What I see now is we have 5 minutes. So I think it's time
To what?
to not dance together,
Yeah.
but to see if, maybe each one of us wants to say something or ask.
I'll just briefly say that the one major thing I've learned from hosting this festival is that the works are quite distinct. And often we teach them together. We'd have a little authentic movement, and then we have a contact workshop, and then we do some BMC. And it's, even in my own experience, it's easy to blend them. But in working and conversing and reading emails and having phone conversations, the walls are semi-permeable, but they're not totally permeable. And I think it's important in this era to really honor the distinctness of each pathway, even though the lake we're headed to is the same. The journeys of how you get there are quite different, whatever there is, the pool of water of what we don't know. So I just, as educators and artists, I think it's good to know these are deeply lived practices and deeply articulated practices, and as we share them, to just hold that in our awareness.
That reminds me of working with you on the self other article, which is the importance of the distinction of self and the merging with other selves to make a self-other, but it doesn't make it one thing. Sort of it's like Barbara talking about not two, not one is a Buddhist principle too. But that's only in relation to what you're saying, but I thank you again for what you've done. And I hope you feel you have something you want to say?
Sure, but you want to say something?
Hey, wait. What about you?
Okay.
Your turn.
Okay. I want to name gratitude that more and more in my life just overwhelms me. I'm grateful beyond what I can say, speaking of language, for this way that somehow my own life has insisted on evolving through this very clear, at times overwhelming, at times such a blessing, just such a clear need to trust that I don't know. I don't know where I am. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know who you are. And the paradox is the gratitude that I experience myself here. I experience coming to know who you are. It's a powerful paradox. The gratitude for the not knowing, which is the infinite vessel, and then the actual gift of being alive and dying and over into life and becoming more intimate with the not knowing because of each human being that somehow, like each one of you here, how did this happen? My colleagues, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
What do you want to say?
I actually don't want to say anything, but thank you. It's been fun.
I'm going to wear a hat like Bonnie next time. I think it brings you some good qualities in.
I don't have to see so much. You can have it.
Yeah, that was